Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. My name is Jesus Nava. I am the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to learn a little bit about our technology. Today, we're going to do a technical analysis class and focus on some of the drawing tools that are part of the TradeStation Desktop. We're going to look at all the different types of trend lines that we have available and what are the differences. And if we have some time, we'll go through some of the other drawing tools on that menu. So let's go ahead and get started. Keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only. These are not recommendations of TradeStation. Also, active trading is not suitable for everyone, and past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. For additional information on these disclosures, go to www.tradestation.com/important-information. So some basic elements about trend line. One of those is that a trend line is, the purpose of a trend line when you draw a trend line on a chart is, of course, to identify a trend, whether it is upward sloping or downward sloping. Price levels on these trend lines can serve as potential entry or exit points. The signals can be generated when the price bounces on that trend line or breaks the trend line to continue on that other direction. Generally, and this is not a rule, this is just something that you can observe when drawing trend lines, sometimes when support is broken, that same support level becomes resistance. And if resistance is broken, sometimes resistance becomes support. And we can see that many times in chart analysis. In another situation, sometimes when resistance or support levels are tested, there's sometimes a pullback in the opposite direction. And it's just a short pullback for it to come back and retest that same level one more time. And if there's a breakout of support and resistance, those levels may be tested again before a new trend is established. So these are different behaviors that you can identify from a trend line and base, trading signals on what the prices are doing in relationship to that trend line. In TradeStation, specifically the TradeStation Desktop, we give you the ability to draw these trend lines in many different calculations. So let's go ahead and take a look. The first one is a freestyle trend line, which allows you to draw the trend line in any angle and in any position you choose. And you can reposition a freestyle trend line without any restrictions. Let's go ahead and take a look at that style of trend line, which is, the default one. When you draw a trend line on TradeStation is freestyle. And we're going to take a look at all the different ways that you can draw trend lines and the settings that you can modify on each one of them. So let me go ahead and go over to TradeStation and show you what we mean by freestyle. Let me go to apps, open up a chart analysis. Doesn't matter what market we load on the chart. I'm just going to leave SPY, which is the symbol that loads here on my chart. This is the 5 minute. Let me change the time frame to daily. And here we go. Trend lines, of course, are going to be right here in the drawing menu. If you are the type of trader that uses drawing tools a lot, sometimes it helps to have the drawing tool visible at all times. That way you don't have to click on the drawing menu to select a tool. You can just click on the tool on the toolbar. If that's the case, there is a drawing toolbar that you can access from within the drawing menu. Right here at the very bottom, there's an option that says toggle drawing toolbar, and you can see that it appears on the left-hand side. The trend line button would be this one. As you hover on the different buttons, there's going to be a tooltips that lets you know the name of that icon. So it'll take a while for you to get familiarized with what the icon looks like. But that's my trend line button. And when I click on it, my cursor changes into a drawing mode, and I can draw the trend line on my chart. As we said earlier, the default is freestyle, which means that I can click. Let me just escape out of this. that was not what I meant to do. If you noticed, when I clicked on the chart, the trend line went and attached to one of my candles. That's because in my drawing menu, I have this setting turned on, which is called snap mode. Snap mode sometimes is convenient if you really want your drawing tools to attach to prices on the candles. Sometimes you're looking for that behavior, especially if you're trying to attach it to a specific price on the candle, like the high or the low. If you want to have that precision, make sure that you turn snap mode on. However, snap mode kind of defeats the purpose of a freestyle trend line because it forces the trend line to attach to one of the prices of the candle. With snap mode on, let me show you what the behavior is. I click on the trend line, and even if I click on this open area where no price bars are visible, you see how the trend line attaches to the candle right below it. And if I move my cursor over here to this area, you can see that the trend line doesn't follow my cursor. It just stays at the very top where the candles are because that's what snap mode does. So I click and I can remove that trend line. As long as you see those little white boxes on the line, it just means that it's selected, and you can press delete on the keyboard to remove that trend line. I'm going to go to the drawing menu and turn that option off, which is the default way. When you have not turned it on, then you really have a freestyle trend line. So let me go here and click on trend line one more time. So I can click up here and then click down here, and then the trend line is anchored on those points that I clicked on. Very interesting way of drawing trend lines, right? Let me remove that. Of course, when you draw a trend line, for the most part, you're looking to attack or click on, when you draw uptrending trend lines, you select two significant troughs or two significant lows. Sometimes these are pivots, and a trend line needs at least two anchor points to draw. If you're drawing, a trend line on the down sloping trend line, then the opposite. We go to the trend line little button, and then we can click on the highs of different candlesticks to attach that trend line. So that's the freestyle. A little bit about what you can do to the trend line, which is also something that I like to do. A lot of times you need to measure the distance between one point and another, point A to point B. Not only measure in terms of number of candles, but you also want to know how many days have passed between those two anchor points, or you want to know what the price change is between one point and the other. So that's a very interesting way of looking at a trend line. So let me remove these two trend lines that I have here on my chart. And let's suppose that I want to understand, or at least calculate, what the difference in prices between this significant low back in October, this was October 13th, 2022, to this significant high that happened on, the date here is July 27th, 2023. If I want to know that measurement, I just click on my drawing tool. This is the situation where I need snap mode, because it'll help me attach that trend line to the specific low and the specific high of that candlestick. Otherwise, if you leave it on freestyle and you click, you may miss that, maximum low or maximum high. So I'm going to go to the drawing menu, turn snap mode on, and I'm going to click on this low of this candle. It attaches to that low, and then I'm just going to click here on the high of this other one. There we go. Now, we probably don't need the trend line to extend to the right if we're just using it as a measuring tool. And of course, that helps us visualize where the trend line begins and where the trend line ends based on the anchor points that we clicked on. Generally, we draw the trend line extending right because we want to see how the price behaves in relationship to that trend line. But if you need the trend line to just do a measurement between point A and point B, we don't need it to extend right, and we can just right click on the trend line, go to extend right, and uncheck it. And that way, it provides you a better visual of where the trend line begins and where it ends, especially if you're using it as a measurement tool. If I click on the trend line and I hold my mouse button, we've done this many times, especially, we did a class not a long time ago on trend lines, and we were talking about strategies that are based on trend lines, and the strategy needs a trend line ID. And we talked about the way of accessing that number. And if you click on the trend line and you hold it, you can see the trend line number right there at the top of the data tips window. Not only that, but you see the begin date, the begin time, and the begin price. The begin date, time, and price are right here, the first anchor point that we clicked on. And below that, you see the end date, the end time, and the end price. And those, of course, are referring to point B, which is the second price that I clicked on. But below that, you see the angle of the trend line. That's very interesting. This is an angle of 34.79. It also tells you the net change between point A and point B. That movement was $111.33. It tells you the percent change, 31.96%. It tells you the bar count. It took 196 bars from point A to point B, and that translates into 287 days. So you get all that interesting information by just clicking and holding on the trend line. In fact, if you want that information to be visible on the trend line, just because you're using trend lines as a measurement tool, you can make that visible by enabling a feature called label. Let me double click on the trend line. And I'm going to go to the labels tab and check the box that says show labels. And for the label, I want to show the percent change. I want to show the price net change, show bar count, and show the time span. I want to show everything. Of course, you can change the font if you want to do that. Let me make it bold, and I'll make it a 12, so it's visible right here on the screen. I'm going to set that as the default. Just be careful of setting it as a default, because every time you draw a trend line, it'll have this information attached to it. Of course, you can always come back and change the defaults again. So if you're in measurement mode and you want to measure, from point A to point B multiple times, it's interesting for you to set it as a default so you don't have to come here for every single line that you draw. So I'm going to click OK. And this is the information that I was talking about, that instead of you clicking on the trend line and going to the data tips to read that information, you can just have it, on the chart visible at all times. Now, I'm going to go here to the drawing menu, and I'm going to click on remain in drawing mode. This is another feature of the drawing that allows you to do multiple lines in sequence. That way you don't have to go back to the trend line button every single time you need to draw a trend line. Let me show you how that works. Let me go ahead and click on remain in drawing mode. I'm going to click on the trend line button, and I can click from this high to this low. I didn't set the extend right as a default. Let's go ahead and escape out of remaining drawing mode. Let me go ahead and you can do that here. Let me just double click on the trend line, go to settings, and then uncheck the extend. And I can set that as a default. Again, those are defaults as you're using them, and then you can come back and change them again. But then here, that move, of course, I can see that it's 55 points, 11 bars, and it's just 15 days. And then you can just keep on drawing. Let me go ahead and remain in drawing mode, click on my trend line, and I can just measure different points. So from this here to over here, then we have 60 days, and it's 40 bars, and it's $69 from point A to point B. What happened to the trend line? Yes. Do I have remaining drawing mode? I have to click it again. If I hit escape, it'll just disable the remaining drawing mode. But if I want to remain in drawing mode, I can continue to click on the different points that I want to measure. And let me go ahead and escape out of this. Once you hit escape, you can see that the remaining drawing mode goes away, and then you have all your measurements, and sometimes, I know that I made my font a little bit big and it's, covering some of the candlesticks, but I just wanted to emphasize the point that yes, you can use the trend lines as a measurement tool. All right, so those are the ways that you draw a freestyle trend line, either to identify a trend or also as a measurement tool. Since I drew a whole bunch of trend lines here on my chart, we do have a quick way for you to remove them all at once. I can go to the drawing menu and there's an option here that says remove drawing objects. I click there and you'll have checkboxes for the drawing tools that you've drawn. As you can see, I've only drawn trend lines, so that's the only checkbox that's available to me to check. And then I just click OK, and it removes all the trend lines at once. So at any moment, if you want to clear your chart of any drawing tools that you've placed there, feel free to do so. Let me go back to my PowerPoint because the next type of trend line is an extreme trend line. And this is interesting because this looks at the way that you're drawing the trend line, whether it is an uptrending trend line or a downtrending trend line. And depending on the slope of that trend line, it'll choose the high or the low. The definition here says it attaches a positive sloping trend line, so that's an uptrend, to the lowest low of the beginning bar and to the highest high of the ending bar. And that's why it's called extreme, because it'll go from the low to the high. And when you draw a negative sloping trend line or downtrending, it'll go from the highest high of that bar and the lowest low of the bar where the trend line ends. Let's go ahead and test that. I'm going to go over here to my chart. I cannot modify the trend line settings before I draw them. So let me go here to trend line. Let me just draw one. Let me go ahead and go to the drawing and turn snap mode on. Drawing, remain in drawing mode. Let me turn those off and hit escape since I don't want to draw another trend line. And let me double click on this trend line. I'm going to go back to extending. So I'm going to extend right. I may want to extend left if I want to. I'm going to set that as the default. And in the calculation field, that's where you have all the different trend lines available. So we already talked about the freestyle. Let's go here to the extreme. I'm going to set that as the default for now, and then just click OK. Perfect. Let me go ahead and remove this. Actually, let me go back in there so that we can see where the trend line is positioned. I want to remove the extending left and right. Set that as the default. All right, that way I have a truncated trend line. So let's go ahead and see. I'm going to go from this low to this high without me even clicking on those prices. And you're going to see how it automatically attaches to the prices that we specified. Notice that also this is a positive sloping trend line. So let's go here to trend line. I'm going to click somewhere down here. I'm not on the low of that bar, but as soon as I click, you can see how the trend line, actually it missed the trend line for, I think it missed I missed the candle, maybe because the spacing in between the candles is very little. So notice that it attached to the high of that candle. But let's see what happens, because I'm going to make this a positive sloping trend line. I'm not sure why it attached to the high. We said that in a positive sloping trend line, it's going to go to the low to the high. So what I'm expecting this to do is once I click on this higher price, it's going to automatically recalculate to the extreme between point A and point B. So I'm going to click somewhere around here, and there we go. Take a look at what happened. You remember that my trend line had started on the high of the candle, but now it attaches to the low. And on this ending candle, it's not on the price that I clicked on, it actually attaches to the high. So this is an extreme trend line. And again, on a positive sloping trend line, it'll go from low to high. Let me go ahead and double click on that so that I can remove the labels. I don't need the labels anymore. And let me go ahead and remove that trend line and draw it the other way. This time, I'm going to go from this high to this low. Again, I'm not going to click on the actual price. You're going to see how extreme is going to automatically attach. So let's go here to the trend line. I'm going to go over here to this somewhere here. In fact, I can click on an area here below. See how it attaches to the high? And then I'm going to come over here to this area. And as soon as I click here, it'll automatically attach the trend line. And since it notices that the slope is negative, it'll attach from that highest point to the lowest point. That is the behavior of an extreme trend line. Again, double click on that trend line, and you have the behavior right in here under calculation. Let's go ahead and talk about fixed point. Let me go over here to my PowerPoint, and this is a fixed point trend line. By the way, all these definitions and details about the trend lines is also available on the help files of the TradeStation platform. So you can go there and search for fixed point and it'll come up. And I think I pretty much copied and pasted from the documentation help file. So make sure you do that. The fixed point is going to attach a trend line to the price that you specify. For example, if you select the open, it draws a trend line from the open of the beginning of the bar of the beginning trend line to the open of the ending bar of the trend line. Pretty simple. So rather than choosing the extremes, it's just going to select the price that you specify. So let's go over here to TradeStation. You can see that by default, I have the open price in there, but I can select any of the prices, even the midpoint. Here's the high plus the low divided by 2. Let's go ahead and select the open first and click OK. And I don't have to redraw the trend line. Notice that I am modifying the calculation of the trend line that I drew. So what I'm going to expect happen if I set it to a fixed point and the open, I'm expecting that trend line to attach to the open of the bar, which is very close to the high, but you'll see it shift a little bit lower. And over here on the bottom one, it's going to go to the top of that body, which is the open of that candle. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and click OK. And there we go. You can see that it shifted a little bit lower. And you can see that now it's not attaching to the low of that candle, it's attaching to the opening price. And of course, you can choose any other price. Let me go ahead and test the midpoint, because that's an interesting way of drawing the trend line as well. It's going to go through the middle of that beginning and ending candle. Open, drop down, and then go to high plus low divided by 2. Click OK. And there we go. Notice that it finds the midpoint between the high and the low, which is not necessarily the middle of the body, is the middle of the wick. And the same happens here on this bottom candle. You can see that it attaches to the midpoint of that candle. All right, let me go back in there. And the next one we're going to take a look at is the regression. The regression also allows you to select the prices that we saw on the fixed point. But instead of attaching to the price that you specify, it's just going to do a regression calculation on those prices. Let me go ahead and click OK. The shift on the trend line is not that major. You can see that it shifted a little bit lower than the midpoint on that candle. And on the ending bar, it's not even touching the candle anymore. It actually shifted higher. Why did it shift higher? Because now it's not only looking at point A and point B. A regression line looks at all the prices between point A and point B. And what it's trying to do is trying to find the least distance from all the opening prices of that segment between point A and point B. And that's why the ending point here shifted a little bit higher, because you can see that the trend line will try to go in the middle of all the opening prices. Does that make sense? So this is a regression calculation. And the interesting thing about this line is that it automatically calculates. I can grab, this trend line on any anchor point and change the calculation. Let me go and reset the scale of this chart. So if I take this anchor point point A. I'm going to click it and I'm going to drag it. Notice that I'm dragging it down. And as I drag it down, the trend line automatically recalculates. I'm going to do it right here on this trough. So again, the anchor point of the trend line, or the bar or the candle that the trend line is calculated on, did not change. This anchor point is still attached to this candle down below. But since it's looking at all the opening prices between point A and point B, it shifts the trend line to create the least distance from all those opening prices between point A and point B. So if you're looking for any regression calculation trend line, this is the way to do it. Double click and you find the regression, and you can choose the prices that you want to do that regression on. Again, we can do the midpoint if we want to, and then it's just slightly shifted that trend line. Was very minor because the midpoints are very close to the opening price when you look at the overall, price movement from point A to point B. Let me double click, and the next one on the list is a screen angle. Screen angle is what the name implies. Actually, this is the regression definition. We didn't come back to the PowerPoint before we drew it, but it draws a linear regression line based on the bar price selected for all bars included in the trend line. So that's from point A to point B. This regression calculation is also known as the best fit method, finding, the least distance from that trend line to all the, the price that you specify, all the opening prices, all the closing prices. Selecting open plots a linear regression line based on the opening prices of all the bars included in the trend line. And the next one is the screen angle. And as the name implies, it's just going to draw a trend line on the specific angle that you specify. When you enter 45, it'll do a 45-degree angle. When you reposition the trend line, it will maintain that angle. The trend line is not mathematically calculated. So the trend line will not recalculate when increasing or decreasing bar spacing. I'll get into that in a little moment because there's got to be an understanding on what happens to that trend line in relationship to the candles when you move it around. It is recommended that screen angle be used strictly as a visual tool. Let's go back here to TradeStation and show you what that means. My screen angle right now is set to 45 degrees. I'm going to click OK. And this is what my trend line looks like in a 45-degree angle. If I move the trend line up and down, drag it at any location, you can see that the trend line does not change its angle. If I try to move it from anchor A or anchor B, I'm trying to move that anchor to another bar, and it moves to another bar, you can see how it gets a little bit shorter, but it maintains its angle at 45 degrees. The problem here is the bar spacing. Since this is not mathematically calculated, as the definition says, it doesn't recalculate when you change the bar spacing. So I want you guys to look at the distance of these candles in relationship to that trend line. If I reduce the bar spacing, you can see that at a certain point, the distance gets bigger. Let me go ahead and go in the opposite direction. Let me just increase the bar spacing. And you can see that, let's say at this point, the bars are closer. I just go one step further and you can see that it gets further apart. The crossovers on those trend lines are going to change as you move the trend line or as you increase the bar spacing. You can see the trend line shifting. So it does maintain its angle, but it's not attached to that angle from point A to point B. I mean, the angle is maintained, and as you shift, the chart from left to right, of course, the crossovers are going to change. So hopefully that is clear, and you're going to see that happening as you click on those trend lines. And the last one is the Gann angle. Gann angle, it draws a trend line based on specific time, which is the run, and price, which is the rise. Run is represented by the number of bars, while rise is represented by the number of points the trend line rises per bar. For example, a trend line with a rise of 2 and a run of 1 has a 2-to-1 price to time ratio. Therefore, for every bar, the trend line increases in price by 2 points. Another example, for a trend line with a rise of 1 and a run of 8, the trend line increases 1 point for every 8 bars. When you reposition or decrease the bar spacing, the trend line will recalculate to maintain the rise and the run ratio, keeping the slope constant. Let's go ahead and take a look and look at the behavior of a Gann fan. Right now, my rise is 10, my run is 10, meaning that for every 10 bars, it's going to run 10 points. So remember that the rise is points and the run is bars. The rise is dollar amount or point value, and the run is going to be the number of bars. If I click OK, this is how my trend line looks. And you can see, let me just open this up a little bit and see if, let me draw some vertical lines so that I can test this. Let me go here to vertical lines. I'm going to draw that one down here. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to do another vertical line right here. So let me just verify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This trend line, it's going to do precisely that. Let me go ahead and draw 2 horizontal lines, 410, and then I'm going to do horizontal line at 420. And you can see how those lines intersect at my vertical line, because for every 10 bars, it's going to increase 10 points. Yeah, it goes forward 10 bars and rise 10 points. If I increase the bar spacing, that ratio will be maintained. Let me just open this up. Okay, and you can see, again, the trend line goes from this intersection to this other intersection because it goes forward 10 bars and it rises 10 points. Interesting way of drawing that trend line, right? And of course, you can adjust the angle by just changing, the rise versus the run. Let me remove the horizontals here. So if you want to see a little bit less of a steep angle, I'm going to come over here to my rise and run, and I'm going to make this a, let's do a 30. For every 30 bars, only rise 10. If I click OK, that's how the trend line looks now. So those are the types of calculation or calculated trend lines that are available on the TradeStation platform. In addition to the trend lines, I wanted to go over a little bit over some of the other drawing tools on TradeStation. You probably saw that I drew vertical lines and horizontal lines just now. One of the great ways of just doing a price alert is by drawing a horizontal line. I teach this a lot in my classes because many times I just want to be alerted if something happens. And this, of course, gives you the flexibility of going to other workspaces and looking at other markets. But if I click on my horizontal line and I put a line on my chart, let's go ahead and do it at 450. By the way, on a symbol like spider, sometimes if I click and drag on my trend line, it's sometimes a little bit tough to drop the trend line at exactly 450. You can see right now, the closest that I can get is 450.05. But that's okay because I can double click on that trend line and then go to the data tab and I can say attach to 450 exactly. And then I click OK, and then it'll do that. So if at any time you're having difficulty dropping a trend line, in this case, a horizontal line, exactly at the price you want, just remember that you can go inside the horizontal line and enter the price manually. So this is a trend line drawn at 450 for spider. If I double click on that trend line, I can go to the alerts tab and enable the alert. There's a couple of things here on alerting that I want to go over because I don't do it on my basic or introductory classes because this is more of diving deeper into the functionality. But when you enable the alert on any trend line or any horizontal line, the behavior it's going to be different depending on what you choose here on this dropdown. The default is breakout intra bar, meaning that the price would have to touch the horizontal line in order for the alert to be generated. In situations, there may be a jump that creates a gap, and the price does not have an opportunity to touch the horizontal line. So all of a sudden, you know, if SPY tomorrow opens at 440 for whatever reason, it jumps my trend line. It doesn't touch it. So this breakout intra bar would not generate the alert for me. So if you want to make sure that you are alerted if it touches the trend line or if it jumps the trend line, make sure you go in here and you choose the behavior that says breakout inter bar. So again, I'm not only looking for the horizontal line to be inside, that's intra, inside the candle, but I can also get an alert if it's inter bar, meaning that it's in between two candles and not touching them. So that's the difference between intra and inter bar. So if you're looking for that behavior, make sure that you change that here. And breakout on close is just waiting for the close of the bar to give you that alert. In the breakout on close, of course, is going to look at both situations, whether it's intra or inter, because it's just looking at the close being on one side of the line, and then once the bar closes, the close has to be on the other side of that line, and that's when the alert is generated. Of course, you can change the alert settings for each one of these drawing tools. A lot of times I just leave it on global messaging preferences, but you know that if you use custom settings, you can specify sounds for each one of your alerts. So if you want to have a specific type of sound for trend lines or horizontal lines, you can do that. If you want to have a different sound for a technical indicator alert, like a moving average cross or an RSI overbought or oversold, you can choose a different sound for that as well. You just have to click on configure. You can go to an audible section. We have the sounds available here. These are the ones that are built into the TradeStation platform. But if you click on configure, you have the ability to add additional sounds. It could be a lot of fun because you can introduce sounds and sound effects and favorite tunes that you can bring or that you want to bring inside of TradeStation and have a little bit of fun. But this is just with the intention of you having the ability to assign, you know, different sounds to the alerts and be able to identify what is happening on your TradeStation based on the sound. Let me cancel out of that. I'm going to cancel out of this. And all the other drawing tools will require either a single click or a double click or even a triple click. I'm not going to go into the Fibonacci tools because Fibonacci is its own intricate world. I do a masterclass on Fibonacci, and we go into the different Fibonacci calculations and how to draw each one of the Fibonacci drawing tools. So I'm going to skip those for now. We talked about, you know, the horizontal lines, vertical lines, and trend lines. Here's a time cycle. Time cycle is an interesting type of drawing tool, and it just requires one click on the chart. You click on the chart, and it has these arcs at the bottom of the chart at equal distances. If you measure the distance between each one of the arcs, it's going to be exactly the same. But here at the bottom, you can click on any of those anchor points and increase the size of those arcs. And this, of course, is going to break up your chart into cycles. And the cycles are going to be exactly the same distance. I can right-click on the arcs. Notice that arc style is the one that is selected by default. If I want to do these segments on my chart, I usually just uncheck this. And when I uncheck this, this is what happens. Instead of having arcs at the bottom, I just have vertical lines all at the same distance from each other. And then I just click on, I have to click on one of these anchor points. Sometimes if you don't click on the actual anchor point, it doesn't increase the distance between one vertical line and the other. So You just have to have a little bit of patience and go down here at the bottom of the chart. You notice that if I click on one of the lines, you can drag it left and right, and you can see how it shifts the whole cycle, backward or forward. So if I leave my cycle on an anchor bar, let's say, for example, I leave it here, and then I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So I'm going to do it on this down trending candle. So I'm just going to grab it by the anchor point, and I'm going to position it right there. So now I know that between each one of those vertical lines, there's going to be 20 candles. Does that make sense? So you can use a cycle drawing tool to create these vertical lines that are going to be exactly at the same distance from each other. And again, you can double click on the cycle drawing tool because it also gives you the alert, and you can enable the alert to alert you, bars before next cycle, so that as it approaches the next vertical line, it'll alert you, and you can do 1 bar before the next cycle. And that way, if I push my chart backward, you can see all the future vertical lines, and as they get crossed, of course, you would be alerted. Let me go ahead and remove that cycle. I just click on one of the lines here, remove, and remove this horizontal line as well. That's my cycles. Let's see the regression channel. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to click on point A and point B. First of all, it draws a regression line, and the channel is created by standard deviations. So those are 2 standard deviations on either side. Of course, I can double click on this regression channel, and I can specify, how many standard deviations I want on that channel. And this is based on the opening. You have the option here to select, which prices is the regression channel being calculated on. So this regression channel, it's very similar to that regression trend line that we drew. The only difference here is that it's going to draw a channel using standard deviations. Okay. The Gann fan, where you have several lines set at a different, rise versus run. If you look at the very end of the line, you can see the ratio. For example, this very top line is 1 to 8. The next one is 1 to 4. There's another factor here that you have to take into account. But in here, in the settings of the Gann fan, you have to specify how many points per bar. So the ratio is calculated based on those points. So I don't see any more questions here in the chat. So this is what I wanted to cover, a little bit of information about trend lines and all the other drawing tools. Many of the drawing tools in TradeStation will have some analytical value. Others are just going to be ways for you to reference certain areas of the chart. For example, the rectangle, the ellipses, those are just ways of drawing different areas of the chart so that you can highlight them. You also have the ability to draw some text on the chart and arrows pointing up and pointing down for you to point at different bars. So just explore all the different tools that you have available in drawing, and I know that you'll find something that you can use. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time immensely. I hope that you guys can look at my calendar of events and see all the upcoming sessions that we have. So thank you for your time today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.